We are counting down the 30 most tragic wedding day deaths ever recorded, incidents where joy turned instantly to horror. From innocent children lost to overlooked hazards, to entire families devastated by a single moment, each entry exposes the deadly risks and hidden danger lurking behind tradition, celebration, and venue oversight. As the countdown progresses, stories move from isolated accidents to disasters that changed wedding industry safety forever. Which fatality stands out as love's darkest hour? Let us begin with number 30. 6-year-old Emily Parker arrived at the chapel in a pale yellow dress, clutching a bouquet of rare orchids. Her parents, eager to give her a special role, had not disclosed her severe peanut allergy to the florist. As the music began, she started her walk down the aisle. But as she reached the center, 20 seconds in, she slowed, eyes watering and lips swelling. Her mother rushed forward and administered an EpiPen at 45 seconds, but the reaction was too severe. CPR began at 1 minute 15 seconds into the event. The ceremony halted as guests watched paramedics struggle to revive her. Emily was pronounced dead minutes later, and the wedding was canceled in shock. Autopsy findings revealed extensive airway swelling and traces of peanut residue in her system. Investigators traced the contamination to the flower farm, but no criminal charges were filed. The florist changed suppliers, and the venue quietly added a waiver asking families to disclose allergies. Emily's story never made headlines, but for one family, the day meant to celebrate love became a permanent scar. Hidden allergens in wedding flowers remain an overlooked risk, with no national regulation requiring disclosure. The loss of a child on the happiest day still stood as a warning. Even the smallest detail can carry fatal consequences. At 5:42 in the afternoon, wedding photographer Daniel Ruiz leaned over a second-story balcony to capture the bride and groom's first embrace in golden light. The railing beneath him measured 34 inches high, 4 inches short of the updated building code. Daniel's camera rig, weighing nearly 23 pounds, pulled against his center of gravity as he adjusted his stance for the perfect angle. In a split second, his balance slipped. He pitched forward, his torso clearing the railing, and he fell 28 feet onto the stone patio below. The impact fractured his skull and caused severe internal bleeding. Guests rushed outside, some still clutching champagne flutes, as paramedics began resuscitation efforts. Daniel remained unresponsive, his pulse fading despite advanced life support. He was pronounced dead 35 minutes after the fall. The medical examiner cited extensive cranial trauma and hemorrhagic shock. An inspection found the balcony's guardrail failed to meet the minimum 38 inches required by local safety codes, a gap that had been overlooked during recent renovations. The venue faced scrutiny over outdated safety measures, and several event vendors began reviewing their own equipment policies. Daniel's death forced the industry to confront the risks vendors face in pursuit of the perfect shot, where a few pounds of gear and a few inches of railing can mean the difference between celebration and tragedy. At 11:02 a.m., 8-year-old Tyler James stepped forward as ring bearer, the satin pillow in his hands secured with a half-inch wide white ribbon tied in a double knot. The ceremony paused as Tyler fidgeted with the ribbon, trying to untie it for the exchange. In one distracted motion, he brought the end of the ribbon to his mouth and tugged with his teeth. The knot slipped, and a loose loop caught in his throat. Within seconds, the satin ribbon lodged deep in his trachea, blocking airflow. Tyler's face turned pale and his lips went blue as he struggled to breathe. His grandmother, seated in the front row, rushed to his side and attempted abdominal thrusts, but the obstruction did not budge. By 11:04 a.m., his pulse faded. Paramedics arrived 7 minutes later, but his airway was fully occluded. Tyler was pronounced dead at the scene. The official cause listed as asphyxia due to foreign body airway obstruction. Investigators noted that ceremonial props often escape the scrutiny applied to toys, despite similar dangers. In the aftermath, the venue reviewed all ceremonial materials for child safety, and pediatric first aid kits and training became standard policy. The warning came too late for Tyler, his death exposing a silent hazard, one that could have been prevented by a different design or a moment of caution on a day meant for joy. By 2 p.m., the temperature at the Vineyard wedding site hovered at 102 degrees Fahrenheit, with humidity driving the heat index even higher. Wedding planner Marissa Lee moved between tents and kitchens, tracking hydration logs for her staff and vendors, but she skipped water breaks herself to keep the $80,000 event on schedule. She wore a black suit and a headset, fielding calls from the catering team and checking the timeline against her clipboard. Guests gathered under canopies while Marissa coordinated deliveries and managed last-minute changes. By 4 p.m., her skin was flushed and her speech slowed, but she pressed on, refusing to leave her post. At 4:22 p.m., she collapsed behind the bar, her core temperature already spiking past 108 degrees Fahrenheit. Staff called 911 as she convulsed, her pulse rapid and thready. Emergency medical technicians arrived within minutes and started intravenous fluids and ice packs, but her organs had begun to fail. Marissa was transported to the hospital, where doctors recorded multi-system organ shutdown. Despite aggressive cooling and rehydration, she was pronounced dead at 7:10 a.m. the following morning. The coroner listed the cause as heat stroke, with dehydration and prolonged exertion as contributing factors. OSHA investigators reviewed hydration logs and found no mandated rest breaks for event staff. New event safety guidelines soon required shaded rest areas and scheduled water breaks for all vendors. Marissa's death forced the industry to reckon with the invisible dangers of working behind the scenes. A reminder that the pressure to create a perfect celebration can cost more than anyone expects. At 9:05 p.m., the DJ queued up celebration, and the dance floor filled with guests, laughter echoing off the high ceilings. Among them, 76-year-old Walter Green moved with surprising energy, spinning his grandson the groom around in a moment of pure joy. Walter had raised the groom after his own son's death, and tonight was the culmination of decades of sacrifice and love. He wore a boutonniere pinned to his suit, smiling as he clapped along to the beat. Halfway through the song, Walter's face tightened. He gripped his chest and stumbled, collapsing onto the polished wood floor. For a few seconds, the music masked the commotion. Then a guest shouted for help. The venue's emergency response plan was tested immediately. An automated external defibrillator was retrieved from behind the bar 5 minutes after Walter's collapse. A nurse among the guests began chest compressions while another dialed 911. The AED pads were placed at 9:10 p.m., but the device detected no shockable rhythm. Paramedics arrived at 9:16 p.m., finding Walter pulseless and unresponsive. He was pronounced dead at 9:18 p.m. The medical examiner later confirmed acute myocardial infarction with underlying coronary artery disease. Walter's absence left a void, not just in family photos, but in the groom's life, his last living grandparent, gone on the night meant to celebrate a new beginning. The venue reviewed its automated external defibrillator placement and response protocols, but no systemic changes followed. For many, the memory of Walter's final dance remains a bittersweet reminder of how quickly joy and loss can share the same floor. At 3:47 p.m., catering assistant Marcus Lee prepared the final chafing dishes for the evening buffet. The kitchen bustled as he knelt to ignite a new fuel canister beneath a silver tray. The canister, part of a recent shipment, hissed as Marcus struck the lighter. Instantly, a vapor cloud ignited in a flash explosion. Flames engulfed Marcus's torso, arms, and face, setting his polyester uniform alight. He stumbled backward and collided with a prep table, while another staff member pulled the fire extinguisher from the wall. The fire was out in under a minute, but Marcus's skin was already blistered and peeling, with deep burns covering most of his body. Paramedics arrived within 5 minutes. intubating Marcus and starting intravenous fluids in the kitchen as guests mingled nearby, unaware. He was transported to the regional burn unit, where doctors recorded burns across 60% of his total body surface area. Over the next 11 days, Marcus endured multiple skin grafts, daily debridement, and round-the-clock pain management. Despite aggressive treatment, sepsis set in as bacteria colonized the damaged tissue. On the 11th day, Marcus's blood pressure dropped sharply, and he entered multi-organ failure. He died in the intensive care unit, leaving behind 2 children under the age of 5. The investigation traced the explosion to a defective fuel canister that had been subject to a silent recall for faulty seals. The venue replaced all buffet heating equipment and instituted mandatory vendor safety checks. Marcus's death forced catering companies nationwide to adopt stricter fuel handling and inspection protocols, aiming to prevent another tragedy from hidden hazards behind the scenes. At 6:18 in the evening, bridesmaid Lauren Kim posed with the wedding party beside the venue's decorative koi pond. She wore a blush tulle ball gown and 4-inch heels, chosen for elegance rather than stability. As the photographer called for everyone to bunch closer together, Lauren stepped backward, her heel catching the edge of the stone border. She lost her balance and toppled into the pond, which measured just over 6 feet deep at its center. The heavy gown ballooned in the water, pulling her under as layers of fabric absorbed gallons within seconds. Panic rippled through the group as guests rushed to the edge, but the pond's perimeter lacked any safety barrier or handhold. Lauren struggled beneath the surface, her movements slowed by the weight of her soaked dress. By the time 2 guests waded in, she had been submerged for nearly 5 minutes. They pulled her out and began CPR on the lawn, but no pulse returned. Paramedics arrived and declared her dead at the scene, the official cause listed as asphyxia due to drowning. The medical examiner noted extensive water in the lungs and abrasions on her ankles from the pond's rough stone lining. Venue records showed no prior incidents, but the absence of a protective railing around the pond was flagged in the investigation. In the aftermath, the property installed waist-high barriers and updated event contracts with clear footwear advisories. Lauren's death exposed the hidden risks of ornamental water features at celebration venues, where a single misstep in formal attire can turn a photo opportunity into a fatal accident. The bachelor party began at 8 p.m. in a hotel suite reserved for the groom's closest friends. The best man, 27-year-old Jason Miller, poured shots for the group, determined to make the night unforgettable for his younger brother. Over the next 4 hours, they consumed vodka, whiskey, and beer, mixing drinks with little regard for limits. By midnight, Jason's speech slurred and his coordination faltered, but the celebration continued. At 1:30 a.m., he stumbled to his room, leaving the others laughing in the hallway. By 8:15 a.m. the next morning, the suite was quiet. The groom knocked on Jason's door, expecting a groggy greeting. Instead, he found his brother unresponsive on the bed, pale with shallow breathing. Attempts to wake him failed. Paramedics arrived to find vomit staining the pillow and evidence of asphyxiation. Jason's blood alcohol concentration was measured at 0.41%, a level consistent with severe central nervous system depression and respiratory failure. Despite advanced airway management, he was pronounced dead at the scene. The wedding was canceled as news spread through the family. Instead of a ceremony, guests attended Jason's funeral a week later. Toxicology reports confirmed acute ethanol toxicity as the cause of death. The hotel's records showed no intervention or wellness checks, raising questions about duty of care for intoxicated guests. The groom, left without his brother and best man, faced a wedding day defined by loss. Jason's death stands as a warning. Binge drinking at pre-wedding events can turn celebration into catastrophe, leaving families to grieve where there should have been joy. At 8:36 in the evening, the groom and his father, Robert Hayes, stepped onto the dance floor as the opening notes of My Wish played. Robert, age 61, had financed every detail of the $120,000 celebration, from the custom floral arrangements to the 12-piece band. He wore a new navy suit, smiling as he gripped his son's shoulder. Midway through the dance, Robert's expression changed. He paused, eyes unfocused, then collapsed without warning. Guests froze, unsure whether it was part of the moment. His son knelt beside him, calling for help as Robert's breathing grew shallow. Emergency medical technicians stationed outside entered within 3 minutes, but Robert's pulse had already faded. The medical examiner later identified a ruptured intracranial aneurysm, a weakened artery wall in the brain that was prone to sudden bursting under physical or emotional stress. Aneurysms like Robert's often remained undetected, even during routine checkups. The burst vessel caused rapid bleeding and increased pressure inside his skull, leading to loss of consciousness and death in less than 2 minutes. Robert's sudden passing left not only a family in shock, but also unsettled financial matters. The venue contract contained no refund clause for catastrophic events after the reception began. Vendors debated partial returns, but most costs were unrecoverable. The wedding, meant to mark a new chapter, became a ledger of loss. For the groom, the memory of his father's final gift, both the dance and the day itself, remained inseparable from the debt of grief. Hidden vascular risks, invisible even to those who planned every detail, can turn celebration into heartbreak in a matter of seconds. At 7:14 p.m., disc jockey Marcus Bell prepared for the couple's grand entrance, cueing their requested playlist from his booth near the dance floor. The sound system drew power from a 240-volt outlet, routed through a tangle of extension cords taped under the table. As guests toasted with champagne, a guest's glass tipped and a stream of liquid ran across the floor and beneath the DJ's station. But as Marcus reached to adjust a cable, his hand brushed a damp patch where the champagne had pooled. The ungrounded equipment created a direct path for current. Marcus's muscles seized as 240 volts surged through his body, locking him in contact with the live circuit for 12 seconds. Witnesses described a sharp crack, then saw Marcus collapse backward, unresponsive. Bystanders rushed to help, but Marcus's heart had already entered ventricular fibrillation, a chaotic rhythm that stopped effective blood flow. Paramedics arrived within 4 minutes, administering defibrillation and advanced cardiac life support. Despite their efforts, Marcus was pronounced dead at the scene. The coroner's report listed electrocution as the cause of death, with burns on his palm and wrist and evidence of cardiac arrest. Electrical inspectors found that the DJ's sound equipment lacked proper grounding and ground fault circuit interrupter protection. The champagne spill had completed the circuit, turning a celebration into a fatal accident. Local authorities mandated ground fault circuit interrupter outlets for all event vendor setups, and venues began requiring proof of recent equipment inspection from DJs and bands. Marcus's death forced a reckoning with hidden electrical hazards at weddings, where a single oversight in safety could end a life in seconds. At 7:35 in the evening, guests gathered in the grand foyer as the bride's mother, Denise Carter, descended the venue's sweeping marble staircase. She wore a floor-length formal gown with a hemline brushing the tops of her shoes, chosen for elegance but offering little room for error. The staircase, a centerpiece of the historic estate, featured risers measuring 8 inches just within code, but steeper than modern standards. As Denise reached the 4th step from the top, her heel caught in the edge of her gown's lining. She stumbled, unable to regain balance, and tumbled headfirst down all 18 polished steps. Her body struck the marble at multiple points, the force fracturing her skull and causing a traumatic brain injury. Guests near the base heard the impact and rushed to her side, finding her unresponsive and bleeding from the scalp. Paramedics arrived within 6 minutes and initiated advanced life support as Denise's breathing became erratic. She was pronounced dead in the ambulance while en route to the hospital, never regaining consciousness. The bride, still waiting for her mother to join the first dance, was told minutes later. The medical examiner's report listed severe cranial trauma and subdural hemorrhage as the cause of death. An investigation found the handrail's height and grip width met minimum code, but the absence of anti-slip treads and the length of formal gowns contributed to the accident. In the aftermath, the venue retrofitted all staircases with textured runners and posted warnings about gown length. Denise's death highlighted a risk rarely considered on wedding days: the silent danger of formal attire meeting unforgiving architecture and the permanent absence left behind when celebration turns to mourning before the first dance begins. At 10:37 in the morning, 26-year-old Evan Brooks sped down County Road 14, the clock on his dashboard flashing red. He had overslept after a restless night, waking to frantic texts from the groom, his childhood best friend, reminding him the ceremony began at 11 o'clock. Dressed in his charcoal suit, tie still loose around his neck, Evan gripped the wheel with one hand and tried to silence his phone with the other. The rural road curved sharply just outside of town. Evan's car, a silver sedan, registered 85 miles per hour in the final seconds before impact. Fatigue and adrenaline blurred his judgment. The tires lost traction on loose gravel, sending the vehicle skidding off the shoulder. The front end collided with a mature oak tree, crumpling the engine block and forcing the steering column into the cabin. The force of the crash caused instantaneous blunt force trauma to the head and chest, with the coroner later noting a cervical spine fracture and an aortic rupture. No pulse was detected when first responders arrived. Evan was pronounced dead at the scene. His watch stopped at 10:41 in the morning. The seat reserved for him at the altar remained empty, a silent witness to the cost of haste. The investigation ruled out alcohol and mechanical failure, attributing the crash to excessive speed and driver fatigue. In the aftermath, the wedding party struggled to reconcile celebration with sudden loss. The venue added a travel advisory to invitations, and local authorities launched a safe driving campaign targeting event days. Evan's story endures as a caution. The pressure to arrive on time can have irreversible consequences, leaving a permanent absence where joy was meant to be. At 5:58 p.m., the ballroom doors opened and 200 guests turned toward the grand staircase. The bride, 29-year-old Allison Grant, stood poised at the top, her white satin dress trailing behind her. The train measured 12 feet, weighed down with beading and lace, designed for dramatic effect. As she descended, the fabric caught on a decorative iron baluster. Allison stepped forward, unaware her train had snagged. The tension pulled her off balance. She pitched forward and tumbled over the top step. Her body fell 20 feet and struck the marble floor below head first. The impact fractured her skull, causing instant loss of consciousness and catastrophic brain injury. Paramedics arrived within minutes, but Allison showed no signs of life. She was pronounced dead at the scene, never reaching the altar where her fiancé waited. The ceremony was canceled as guests, including her parents and future husband, witnessed the aftermath in shock. The medical examiner's report cited a massive basilar skull fracture and subdural hemorrhage. Investigators noted the train's weight and length exceeded recommended limits for stair entrances, and no safety attendant had been assigned to manage the gown. In response, the venue revised its protocols, requiring staging assistance for formal attire and restricting lengthy trains on staircases. Allison's death forced the wedding industry to confront the overlooked dangers of fashion and architecture colliding. For her family and the groom, the day meant to celebrate unity ended in irreversible loss. witnessed by all who had gathered to share in her happiness. At 4:19 p.m., guests gathered beneath a white arbor on the edge of a rural hillside, the breeze carrying the sound of vows across open fields. The Reverend Thomas Lyle, age 58, stood facing the couple, his voice steady as he read from a leather-bound book. Beyond the property's low fence, hunting season had opened that morning, with posted signs marking the legal boundary. At that moment, a hunter positioned 400 yards away fired a high-velocity rifle at a distant target, unaware of the wedding unfolding beyond the tree line. The bullet, a .30-06 round, traveled its full range, passing through branches and brush before entering the ceremony space. Without warning, it struck Reverend Lyle in the upper chest, penetrating between the third and fourth ribs. He staggered, blood blooming across his shirt, and collapsed in front of the stunned couple. Guests screamed and scattered as several rushed to his side. The wound severed the left subclavian artery, causing rapid exsanguination. Despite immediate pressure and frantic calls for help, Lyle bled out within 8 minutes, losing consciousness before paramedics arrived. Law enforcement traced the trajectory and recovered the spent bullet near the altar. The hunter, who held a valid permit but failed to check his line of fire, was charged with criminal negligence. The incident forced local authorities to review buffer zone regulations and prompted venues statewide to implement expanded perimeter safety protocols during hunting season. The memory of a ceremony interrupted by a stray shot remains a stark reminder that celebration can be shattered by dangers lurking far beyond the property line. At 6:11 in the evening, 10-year-old Matthew Lynn wandered away from the cocktail hour, drawn to the panoramic view from the venue's rooftop observation deck. The railing, spaced at 4-inch intervals and standing just 36 inches high, offered little resistance for a child determined to see the city below. Matthew climbed onto the lowest rung, gripping the metal bars as he leaned forward. But as he leaned out, his hand slipped and his body pitched over the edge. He fell 45 feet, landing on the concrete courtyard below. The impact caused multiple fractures to his pelvis, femur, and ribs, along with internal injuries to his liver and lungs. Bystanders rushed to his side, finding him unconscious and struggling to breathe. Emergency responders arrived within minutes, stabilizing his airway and preparing him for airlift. The helicopter touched down in the adjacent lot, blades whipping dust across the crowd as paramedics loaded Matthew inside. Despite rapid transport and advanced trauma care, he was pronounced dead during the flight. The coroner's report listed exsanguination from blunt force trauma as the cause of death. Building inspectors cited the railing's height and spacing, just within outdated code, but insufficient to prevent a determined child from climbing. In the aftermath, local authorities amended regulations to require higher railings and tighter spacing on elevated decks, especially at venues hosting children. Matthew's story became a catalyst for change, exposing how architectural features designed for aesthetics can become fatal hazards when curiosity meets inadequate barriers. The memory of a child's laughter, silenced by a preventable fall, lingers as a warning for every celebration held above ground level. The golden retriever wore a satin bow tie and carried the rings down the aisle, earning smiles from every guest. As the couple exchanged vows, their service dog Max waited patiently by the altar, a fixture in every engagement photo and a source of comfort for the groom, who lived with chronic anxiety. Later that evening, as guests drifted into the reception, Max circled the tables, sniffing the floral centerpieces. Several arrangements featured white lilies, chosen for their elegance and fragrance. But as the night progressed, within hours, Max began to vomit and refused water. By midnight, he struggled to stand, his breathing shallow. The couple rushed him to the emergency veterinary clinic, and blood work revealed acute kidney failure, a classic sign of lily toxicity in dogs. Despite intravenous fluids and aggressive treatment, Max stopped producing urine by the 12th hour, a condition known as anuria. He died quietly in the hotel suite before dawn, curled beside the wedding dress. The veterinarian report cited nephrotoxic compounds found in lilies as the cause of irreversible renal shutdown. The loss devastated the newlyweds, who had included Max in every part of their celebration. In response, several florists in the city revised their policies, flagging toxic blooms in bridal consultations and posting warnings for pet owners. Max's death became a somber lesson in hidden dangers, reminding couples and vendors alike that celebration should never come at the cost of a companion's life. Across all 30 cases, one truth stands out. Even life's most joyful rituals hide lethal risks when safety and tradition collide. Weddings amplify vulnerability, as attire, emotion, and crowded celebrations turn minor hazards into mass tragedy. These deaths aren't just rare flukes. They reveal how easily neglect or chance can turn love's promise into loss. Every celebration demands vigilance, because tragedy never waits for the perfect moment. For more shocking True Life rankings, subscribe and share your thoughts below. Today, we're counting down the 7 most horrific wedding day deaths ever recorded. A ranking where moments meant to symbolize forever instead became unforgettable nightmares. From silent structural failures to raging infernos, overlooked safety hazards to preventable disasters in lavish venues, each entry exposes devastating irony at the peak of celebration. Which tragedy stands as the deadliest of all? Let's begin with number 7. At a historic mansion built in the 1920s, a wedding celebration drew more than 150 guests for an evening of photos and laughter. The couple, college sweethearts together for 6 years, chose the venue for its charm and reputation. Hundreds of events had filled its halls without incident. During golden hour, the groom and 3 groomsmen gathered on the 3rd-floor balcony for formal portraits. The combined weight of 4 adults, over 750 pounds, rested on timber beams hidden beneath fresh paint. Cosmetic renovations in recent years had covered up deep-seated dry rot and rusted fasteners, but the underlying wood had not been inspected or reinforced. A faint sag in the balcony had been dismissed weeks before as harmless settling. Without warning, the structure failed. All 4 men plunged 35 feet onto the brick courtyard below. The bride, watching from a nearby window, witnessed the collapse and was later hospitalized for shock. The groom died instantly from blunt force trauma. The 3 groomsmen succumbed to their injuries within hours. Emergency responders found the balcony's support beams splintered and decayed, with engineering reports later confirming years of undetected rot. The venue was shut down permanently, and an $8 million lawsuit followed. For the families, the promise of a lifelong union ended in a single preventable fall. At a 4-star hotel in the city center, a newlywed couple checked into the honeymoon suite on the 12th floor, still dressed in their wedding attire. The celebration had ended hours earlier, but behind the scenes, contractors had spent the afternoon rewiring electrical panels for an ongoing renovation. To speed up work, management ordered the fire suppression system disabled, a decision documented in internal emails but never disclosed to guests. At 3:20 a.m., a short circuit sparked behind the wall, igniting insulation and sending toxic smoke into the hallway. The suite's windows, sealed shut for energy efficiency, offered no escape. Within 4 minutes, carbon monoxide levels in the room reached fatal concentrations. First responders found the couple collapsed together near the window, both victims of acute smoke inhalation. The fire marshal's timeline confirmed the suppression system never activated, allowing smoke to fill multiple floors unchecked. Autopsy results showed lethal carboxyhemoglobin saturation. The hotel remained closed for 2 years as investigators uncovered records of repeated safety bypasses. A $15 million settlement followed, and the unlicensed contractor responsible for the faulty wiring faced criminal charges. For the families, the final image was of 2 lives ended side by side, suffocated by a chain of preventable decisions. A white stretch limousine rolled through the dusk along a rural highway, carrying the bride, groom, and 4 closest friends toward a reception that would never begin. The couple, high school sweethearts from a small town, had planned every detail for months. Their families followed behind in separate cars, eager to join the celebration. The limousine company, fined 3 times in the past 2 years for safety violations, had skipped essential brake repairs after a recall notice. That afternoon, the assigned driver started his 14th consecutive hour behind the wheel. By the time he reached the intersection at County Road 17, fatigue had dulled his reflexes. He was texting a dispatcher when the limo approached a stop sign at 55 miles per hour. The brakes, never serviced, failed to respond. The vehicle rolled into the crossing, directly into the path of a loaded semi-truck. The impact crushed the passenger compartment, killing 5 instantly: the bride, groom, maid of honor, best man, and a bridesmaid. The remaining bridesmaid survived with a severed spinal cord, paralyzed from the chest down. Parents trailing the limo witnessed the collision and arrived at the scene within moments, confronted by the wreckage and the silence of lost futures. Emergency crews reconstructed the crash, confirming a braking distance less than half of what was required for the vehicle's weight. DMV records revealed overdue inspections and falsified maintenance logs. 300 guests waited at the reception hall for news that would never come. The company faced a $22 million lawsuit and criminal investigation. For the families, the memory of that highway would eclipse every joyful plan that came before. An 1890s warehouse transformed into a modern wedding venue filled with 180 guests, 30 above its legal limit. The bride and groom, both architects, had chosen the space for its exposed brick and open floor plan, trusting in its character and history. Their private messages to the venue owner referenced their professional confidence in the building's safety. Permitting files, however, showed the conversion never included a structural reinforcement of the original floor joists. No inspection had been logged in over 6 years. The first dance began just after 8 p.m. As the couple moved across the center of the old timber floor, guests crowded around the edges, drawn in for photos and applause. The 20 by 20 foot section beneath them was supported by joists that had been exposed to decades of moisture and dry rot, hidden by cosmetic repairs. Load calculations later revealed the actual weight on that section exceeded safe capacity by more than 40%. Without warning, a sharp crack echoed through the room. The floor dropped 8 feet into the basement below, taking the couple and more than 30 guests with it. The bride died instantly from a skull fracture on impact. The groom, pinned by a splintered beam, suffered fatal internal injuries and was pronounced dead within 6 minutes. Emergency crews arrived to chaos. Injured guests trapped in debris, panicked family members searching for loved ones. Coroner's records would list 2 deaths at the scene, with dozens more hospitalized for fractures, lacerations, and blunt trauma. City engineers condemned the building within 24 hours. Investigation reports cited missing load rating paperwork and permit deficiencies throughout the renovation process. The venue's insurance settled for $18 million. 3 weeks after the funeral, the groom's father died of a heart attack attributed to acute stress. For every survivor, the memory of the first dance is now inseparable from the collapse that followed. A country club's outdoor pavilion hosted a wedding reception for 220 guests, with the bride's younger sister standing as maid of honor. The two had been inseparable since childhood, and the family had spent months preparing for this day. Late afternoon storms swept through the area the night before, damaging an underground electrical conduit and an exterior breaker box near the event patio. The groundskeeper's log noted a flickering light and exposed wires at dawn, but the entry was never relayed to management. The club, already overdue for 2 mandated electrical inspections, pressed ahead with the schedule. As evening settled, guests gathered on the metal platform for the bouquet toss, a tradition the sisters had joked about for years. The bride's sister caught the bouquet in a burst of laughter, then reached out to steady herself on the platform's edge. At that moment, a 240-volt current surged through the metal, completing a circuit from her hand to her feet. Muscle contraction locked her in place for 8 seconds. The groom, rushing to help, received a secondary shock but was thrown clear by the force. Witnesses described a sharp crack, the scent of ozone, and the sudden collapse of the maid of honor. Emergency responders arrived within minutes, but the autopsy later confirmed instant cardiac arrest. ECG tracings from the scene showed no electrical activity. Resuscitation attempts proved futile. The bride, still barefoot from the dance floor, stood just feet away, watching her sister's body remain rigid until the current subsided. Family members and friends, many of whom had watched the sisters grow up together, struggled to process the scene. The wedding dissolved in confusion and grief. In the months that followed, the bride's mental health deteriorated. She attempted suicide twice, and the marriage ended within half a year. The club faced a $12 million lawsuit, and state regulators overhauled inspection protocols requiring real-time reporting of electrical hazards for all event venues. Inspection dockets and groundskeeper logs became central evidence in court. For everyone present, the day intended to celebrate family became a permanent reminder of how invisible risks can destroy even the closest bonds. A rustic barn set on rolling farmland hosted 250 guests for an 11 p.m. sparkler send-off, the final tableau of a day built on music, vows, and family reunions. The bride and groom, both musicians who met at a festival, had chosen the venue for its open fields and vintage charm. Guests lined up in 2 rows, sparklers blazing as the couple prepared to walk through a shimmering archway. Wind gusts, measured later at 8 miles per hour, swept through the property. A single spark, carried by the breeze, drifted 30 feet to an open-sided storage shed. Inside, the venue owner had stacked dozens of cases of professional-grade fireworks, intended for a 4th of July event the following week. No lock secured the door. The spark landed among the cartons. Investigators would later confirm the ignition point by analyzing burn patterns and inventory logs. Within seconds, a low-order detonation triggered a chain reaction. A shockwave tore through the barnyard, sending shrapnel and fire in every direction. The groom, closest to the shed, was struck in the thigh by a fragment of metal casing. The wound severed his femoral artery. He bled out in under 4 minutes despite frantic efforts from guests and paramedics. The bride's father, standing between his daughter and the blast, was killed instantly by the primary explosion. 2 additional guests died, one from blunt trauma, another trampled in the chaos as the crowd stampeded for safety. More than 40 others suffered burns, lacerations, or crush injuries, with 16 requiring intensive care. The aftermath was recorded in hospital intake logs and forensic diagrams. Blood-stained wedding attire became evidence in the investigation. The bride, in a dress soaked with her husband's blood, gave testimony at the State House weeks later. Fire marshal reports cited gross negligence. Fireworks stored in violation of ATF and NFPA codes, no fire separation, no emergency plan. The property owner and event planner faced involuntary manslaughter charges. The venue's insurance settled with victims' families for $28 million. Legislators moved quickly, passing a statewide ban on fireworks storage within 150 feet of any public assembly venue. Pyrotechnic use at barn weddings, once a trendy photo opportunity, was sharply curtailed across the industry. For survivors, the trauma endured long after the headlines faded. Medical records documented months of reconstructive surgery and psychological counseling. The bride, who had chosen a sparkler exit for its symbolism of joy and new beginnings, now marked each anniversary in black. The explosion's ripple effect reached well beyond the farm, reshaping event safety laws and ending a tradition that had promised nothing but celebration. A luxury vineyard in California prepared for its final spectacle as dusk settled over the hills. The wedding, valued at over $400,000, drew 180 in-person guests and 500,000 online viewers. The couple, both social media influencers, had documented every step of their relationship, from the viral engagement to the day's elaborate ceremony. Their exit was planned as a global event. A helicopter departure streamed live across multiple platforms, coordinated with drones and professional camera crews. The aircraft, a Bell 206, was chartered for the occasion. Maintenance logs later revealed that its last comprehensive inspection was 6 months overdue. FAA records listed the pilot as fully licensed, but his medical certificate had expired pending review for a heart condition. The flight manifest showed a total load, passengers, crew, and camera equipment, that exceeded the manufacturer's recommended maximum by 120 pounds. At 7:42 p.m., the helicopter lifted off from the vineyard's lawn, climbing to 300 feet. Wind speed measured at 14 knots, just below the operator's safety threshold. Within seconds, the aircraft began to yaw unexpectedly. Onboard audio captured in the live stream recorded the pilot's rapid breathing, clipped instructions, and then a sudden silence. NTSB reconstruction, using metadata from the multiple live feeds, pinpointed the moment control was lost. The pilot suffered a cardiac event, confirmed by autopsy, incapacitating him as the machine entered an uncontrolled spiral. The helicopter crashed 200 yards from the reception tent, impacting the ground at a 60-degree angle. The bride died instantly from blunt force trauma. The groom, trapped by collapsed fuselage and pinned by burning wreckage, remained conscious for nearly 4 minutes. His cries, captured on both the live stream and guests' smartphones, were later analyzed by forensic audio specialists. The pilot was pronounced dead at the scene. Emergency response was hampered by the scale of the crowd and the confusion of guests, many of whom believed the crash was a planned stunt. Fire crews arrived within 7 minutes, but by then, the aircraft was fully engulfed. The NTSB investigation cited 3 primary factors: the pilot's undisclosed medical history, the aircraft's over-limit weight due to camera equipment, and overdue maintenance on critical flight controls. Maintenance logs showed missing signatures for required airworthiness directives. FAA dockets included statements from the charter company, admitting to pressure from event planners to proceed despite known risks. The crash was broadcast live to an audience of hundreds of thousands, with the footage rapidly circulating on social media platforms and news outlets worldwide. Attempts to remove the video proved futile, as copies proliferated across the internet. The legal aftermath included a $45 million settlement paid by the charter operator's insurer, the largest in U.S. wedding industry history. Regulatory agencies responded by issuing an immediate ban on helicopter wedding exits nationwide and revising pilot fitness and charter compliance standards. The couple's social media accounts remain online, now serving as digital memorials. For the families and the millions who witnessed the tragedy in real time, the promise of forever ended in a moment of spectacle, transforming a symbol of new beginnings into the most documented wedding day death ever recorded. From a 35-foot balcony collapse to a live-streamed helicopter crash watched by 500,000 people, this countdown has exposed the most horrific wedding day deaths ever recorded. Across all 7 entries, one pattern stands out. Behind each tragedy was a preventable failure: overlooked structural rot, disabled safety systems, ignored warnings, or reckless decisions by professionals. The most shocking cases, like the sparkler send-off explosion and the helicopter disaster, reveal how even luxury venues and high-profile celebrations are not immune to catastrophic oversight. These deaths didn't happen in dangerous places. They struck at the heart of supposed safety, surrounded by loved ones and meticulous planning. The list proves that the ultimate irony of wedding day deaths lies in their contrast between expected joy and sudden, violent loss. In every case, a day meant to symbolize forever became a reminder of how quickly life can change when hidden hazards go unchecked. The real lesson? Even life's happiest moments demand vigilance, because tragedy can strike when we least expect it. We are counting down the 7 worst deaths of couples ever recorded through history. A ranking where every entry exposed how love and trust could turn professional skill into deadly error. Ranging from social media-fueled stunts that went fatally wrong to experienced adventurers whose mutual confidence became a fatal flaw, these cases revealed how shared ambition could override even expert judgment. Which couple tragedy defined the ultimate consequence of partnership? Let us begin with number 7. Vishnu Viswanath and Meenakshi Murthy, both in their late 20s, arrived at Yosemite's Taft Point on October 25, 2018. Vishnu worked as a systems engineer, Meenakshi as a clinical psychologist. Together, they curated a travel blog filled with images of cliffside sunsets, daring poses, and the hashtag #DoItForTheGram. In the days before their deaths, their Instagram stories documented plans for a sunset photo session at the edge of the park's most dramatic overlook. Messages between them referenced going just a little further for the perfect shot, encouraging each other to make this moment stand out among their followers. At 5:45 p.m., witnesses saw the couple cross beyond the safety railing, setting up a tripod for a timed selfie. Bystander video captured laughter, then a discussion about stepping back for a better angle. But as they leaned toward the view, both fell nearly 800 feet to the rocks below. Rescue teams recovered their bodies together, still holding parts of their camera equipment. The coroner's report cited multiple system trauma, catastrophic cranial, thoracic, and spinal fractures. Pronouncement of death occurred at 7:23 p.m. at the scene. The National Park Service investigation found a pattern of mutual risk escalation driven by the couple's shared desire for online validation. Taft Point had recorded 5 similar fatalities in the 3 years prior, but signage remained limited. Within 18 months, new steel barriers and warning signs appeared at the overlook, and daylight hour restrictions were imposed on cliff-edge photography. The deaths of Vishnu and Meenakshi are now cited in studies of relationship-driven risk and the global danger selfie phenomenon, prompting debates about the role of partnership in amplifying fatal decisions. On August 12, 2021, 2 married geologists in their early 30s entered an unmapped cave system in rural Tennessee. Both held doctoral work in karst hydrology, and both had years of documented caving experience. Helmet-mounted camera logs recorded their descent at 10:08 a.m., and depth sensors tracked their progress nearly half a kilometer from the cave mouth. At 11:36 a.m., helmet footage captured the first signs of trouble, water seepage and mudslides advancing along the passage floor. By 11:41 a.m., alarms on their oxygen monitors and communication devices sounded simultaneously. Audio from the helmet cameras revealed a tense exchange, each partner debating whether to abort or to push forward, and neither willing to insist on retreat. 11 minutes later, rising floodwaters blocked their return route. Both attempted to reach a mapped vertical shaft, but inspection of recovered equipment showed rope gear had been compromised by sediment and silt. The outside support team lost radio contact at 12:11 p.m. and initiated an emergency call. Rescue teams arrived, but a secondary collapse delayed entry for over 90 minutes. When the couple was finally extricated at 3:47 p.m., both had suffered hypoxic brain injury and acute pulmonary edema from prolonged submersion in rising water. Archived group messages later revealed that warnings about seasonal flooding had circulated among local cavers for weeks, but the couple's confidence in their skills and incomplete mapping led them to underestimate the risk. In the aftermath, state authorities imposed a permit-only system for unmapped caves, requiring dual communication devices and personal flood alarms for all entries. Mandatory and field risk logs became standard, with enforcement by land management agencies. David Wilson and Sarah Nguyen arrived at Queenstown Bungee Park on October 14, 2015, carrying the weight of their own expertise. David was an engineer specializing in structural fatigue, and Sarah was a safety consultant known for her work on adventure tourism risk. They had requested a tandem jump to celebrate their anniversary, and their waiver forms and email correspondence with park management documented months of anticipation and technical questions about cord dynamics and redundancy. The couple's professional credentials intensified the irony of what followed. At 2:31 in the afternoon, security camera footage recorded their leap from the platform. Seconds into the freefall, the bungee cord snapped. Both fell over 40 meters, striking the riverbank below. Emergency teams responded within minutes, but the trauma was beyond survivable limits. Paramedics pronounced David and Sarah dead at 2:34 in the afternoon, citing catastrophic multi-system trauma, massive skeletal, thoracic, and neurovascular compromise. Inspection logs reviewed after the accident showed the cord used for their jump had logged 225 cycles, exceeding the manufacturer's recommended service limit of 200. Internal maintenance records revealed notations about delayed replacement, citing ongoing supply chain issues. 2 staff members had filed whistleblower emails to management in June and in August of that year, warning about overstretched service intervals and the risk of catastrophic failure. Instead of acting, supervisors reassigned one whistleblower to a non-safety role and archived the complaints without follow-up. The Royal Commission's investigation concluded that a critical maintenance deviation, compounded by a culture of suppressing safety concerns, directly led to the deaths. The findings prompted a national overhaul, including twice-yearly certification audits for all bungee and adventure equipment, anonymous whistleblower protections, and a requirement for public posting of inspection records at every adventure tourism site in New Zealand. The deaths of 2 recognized safety professionals, trusting the very system they helped design, became a case study in the dangers of procedural complacency and the consequences of silencing internal warnings. On April 20, 2019, Emily Chang and Luis Garcia, both in their late 20s, lined up at the start of the Sonoran 50 Ultramarathon. As co-owners of a fitness center in Phoenix, they had trained side by side for months, logging long desert runs and sharing race strategies. Emily was a certified fitness coach, and Luis was a nutritionist and an amateur triathlete. They had a reputation for mutual encouragement and relentless competitiveness, traits that fueled their rise as a couple in the endurance community. By midday, the temperature had climbed from 83 to 100 degrees Fahrenheit, with heat radiating off the sand and the rock. GPS and biometric trackers on both runners recorded a slowing pace at mile 38. Emily's core temperature peaked at 104.1 degrees Fahrenheit, and Luis's at 103.4 degrees Fahrenheit. GoPro footage later retrieved by investigators captured their exchange at mile 41 when Emily said they were almost there and to give a little more and not to quit. Each downplayed symptoms of dizziness and muscle cramping, unwilling to admit weakness in front of the other. Data logs showed both skipped the final electrolyte checkpoint, choosing to press on rather than lose momentum. At 1:45 p.m., Emily collapsed at mile 43. Her heart rate spiked and then flatlined within minutes. Luis attempted basic life support, but his own confusion and slurred speech were evident in the footage. He collapsed less than 100 yards away. Medical teams reached Emily at 2:18 p.m., pronouncing her dead at the scene from heat stroke and severe electrolyte imbalance, with evidence of rhabdomyolysis and ventricular fibrillation. Luis was found at 2:31 p.m., also deceased. The post-race investigation cited mutual competitive encouragement as a key factor. each suppressing their own distress because neither wanted to jeopardize the other's race. Event organizers, under regulatory review, instituted mandatory pre-race medical screening, compulsory in-race electrolyte monitoring, and a peer abandonment override rule requiring immediate withdrawal if a teammate collapsed. The deaths of Emily and Luis exposed the hidden danger of physiological collapse masked by relationship dynamics, prompting reforms now standard in ultramarathon events across the Southwest. Chris Martin and Ashley Roberts, both in their mid-30s, arrived at Adventure X theme park in Texas on March 7, 2016. Their online presence as thrill-seeking lifestyle vloggers had earned them sponsorships and a dedicated following, including features on national extreme adventure programs. Days before the incident, they submitted a waiver requesting a custom double-flying harness for a tandem upside-down bungee jump, a configuration never before attempted at the park. Internal audio from the park office captured the negotiation. Management hesitated, citing a failed stress test on the harness just weeks prior. Chris and Ashley pressed their case, referencing previous stunts and warning of negative publicity if their request was denied. Supervisors debated, but the couple's insistence and the threat of social media backlash tipped the decision. Operator logs later confirmed a deviation from standard operating procedure, with the ride attendant authorized to use the untested harness as a customer accommodation. At 3:08 p.m., the couple was secured into the harness and launched from a platform 70 feet above ground. Within seconds, the main stitching failed. Both were ejected, falling to the concrete below. Emergency medical teams responded within 3 minutes. Paramedics documented catastrophic thoraco-abdominal trauma, cranial fractures, and rapid exsanguination. Chris and Ashley were pronounced dead on site 5 minutes after impact. The medical examiner's report cited non-survivable injuries consistent with high-velocity blunt force trauma. The investigation uncovered a chain of ignored objections. Internal emails showed the park risk manager had warned against any custom harness use without full retesting. Audio from the operator booth revealed the attendant expressing concern, but feeling pressured by both the couple's demands and a supervisor's directive to proceed. State safety inspectors reviewed operator logs and stress test records, confirming that the harness had failed a required load test on February 25th. In response, state lawmakers passed legislation mandating that all amusement ride operators log every deviation from safety protocols and submit quarterly accident audits. The Adventure X park chain introduced a multi-person override requirement for any custom ride requests, and retrained staff in risk communication and refusal authority. Chris and Ashley's deaths remained a reference point in operator compliance training, cited as evidence of how customer pressure and provider acquiescence can override established safeguards with lethal results. On May 22, 2020, Lee Grant and Jennifer Boyd prepared for a technical dive on the USS Oriskany, a sunken aircraft carrier resting more than 20 nautical miles off the Florida coast. Both held advanced certifications. Lee was a PADI master instructor. Jennifer was a technical diver with nearly a decade of deep wreck experience. Their logbooks documented hundreds of dives together, often at the limits of recreational safety. Their plan called for a maximum depth of 130 feet, targeting the outer flight deck. Dive computers recorded their descent at 9:04 a.m. with a steady drop past the planned limit. By 9:18 a.m., the pair had reached 167 feet, well below the recommended threshold for their gas mix. Dive profiles later extracted from their computers show a rapid increase in exertion and air consumption at depth. At 37 minutes into the dive, Lee's primary regulator began to free flow at 156 feet, rapidly depleting his remaining gas. Jennifer moved to assist, but her own backup regulator failed to deliver breathable air. Subsequent analysis of both tanks revealed a 16% oxygen mix, dangerously hypoxic at these depths where safe partial pressure of oxygen is critical. Instead of signaling for an emergency ascent or deploying surface markers, the couple attempted to share equipment and troubleshoot in situ. Buddy teams later reported seeing no distress signals or visible attempt to abort the dive. Within minutes, both divers lost consciousness. Surface support initiated an emergency recall after losing contact, but by the time recovery divers reached the pair, Lee and Jennifer were unresponsive. Medical reports cited profound hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy and acute decompression illness. Jennifer was declared dead on deck. Lee was transported to a hyperbaric chamber but did not recover and was pronounced dead 45 minutes later. The investigation traced the fatal sequence to a breakdown in redundant safety protocols and a misplaced trust in mutual expertise. Both divers bypassed the standard pre-dive gas analysis, relying on routine and each other's judgment. Their established partnership, once a safeguard, became a single point of failure. In 2021, training agencies revised technical dive protocols, mandating independent gas verification and requiring non-couple buddy teams for advanced dives at high-risk sites. The Oriskany double fatality is now cited in industry reforms, underscoring how even the most competent partners can override caution in the presence of deep mutual trust. On July 9, 2014, John Lee and Priya Singh arrived at the Chalong Pier in Phuket before sunrise. 3 days into their honeymoon, their itinerary was packed with excursions, each meant to be a milestone to document and share. The couple were both in their late 20s and had met at Stanford. John was a tech entrepreneur based in San Francisco. Priya was a newly licensed physician. Their backgrounds reflected careful planning and achievement, but that morning the pressure to capture a memory outweighed every warning. At 7:22 in the morning, the first red flag advisory went up along the Andaman coast. Local guides monitored wind gusts rising past 30 knots and relayed updates over VHF radios, noting unsafe conditions and recommending no launches. Between 7:30 and 8 in the morning, guides approached each group of tourists, repeating the same message: the sea was too rough for kayaking. Cell phone video from another guest captured John and Priya at the edge of the dock, negotiating with staff. Their voices were calm but insistent, referencing online reviews and a tight schedule. They said, "We take responsibility, it's our honeymoon, we just want the sunrise." The guides, under pressure from multiple parties, relented and began prepping the boats. The red flag remained posted. At 8:14 in the morning, John and Priya launched their two-person kayak, paddling beyond the reef with two other tourist pairs. Radio logs show a final advisory at 8:21 in the morning, reporting that a squall line had formed offshore, visibility was dropping, and waves were cresting over 1 meter. By 8:37 in the morning, the couple's kayak was more than 300 meters from shore. Cell phone footage from a nearby boat shows darkening clouds and the first whitecaps breaking across the surface. At 8:51 in the morning, a sudden gust flipped their kayak. Witnesses described frantic attempts to right the vessel, but both were quickly separated from their paddles and swept under the overturned hull. The rescue call went out at 8:53 in the morning. A patrol boat arrived within 14 minutes, but by then, both John and Priya were unresponsive. EMS logs note hypothermic cardiopulmonary arrest on retrieval. John was pronounced dead at 9:29 in the morning, Priya at 9:47. The autopsy cited acute hypothermia and asphyxia due to entrapment under the vessel. The investigation reviewed radio traffic, closed-circuit television, and tourist footage, confirming that multiple explicit warnings had been issued and documented in guide logs. The couple's insistence on proceeding, tied to honeymoon expectations and the desire for a unique experience, became a central focus of the official report. The tour operator settled liability claims out of court. In early 2015, the provincial government enacted mandatory pre-launch safety briefings for all water-based excursions, granting local guides final authority to veto departures under adverse conditions. Industry-wide, the United Nations World Tourism Organization issued new advisories, highlighting the Phuket case as a global example of cross-cultural risk miscommunication and the dangers of milestone-driven pressure. Today, every adventure tour in Phuket begins with a weather briefing and a signed acknowledgement of guide authority. The deaths of John Lee and Priya Singh are referenced in international tourism safety seminars, cited as the turning point that forced operators and regulators to prioritize local expertise over tourist preference. Their story stands as the most explicit case of love's milestone pressure overriding every warning, reshaping global standards in adventure tourism safety. Across all 7 tragedies, one pattern emerged. When love and partnership deepened, so did the willingness to override caution. The very trust that made couples strong together could blind them to escalating risk, with fatal consequences. These cases proved that shared ambition could amplify danger, not just protect against it. For every couple who pursued adventure, that lesson mattered more than ever. If this shocked you, share your thoughts below. We are counting down the 7 deadliest wedding day disasters where celebrations of love turned instantly catastrophic. From traditions that became fatal rituals to dream venues collapsing into nightmares, each entry shows how wedding day choices led directly to tragedy. Which incident stands as the ultimate collision of joy and death? Let us begin with number 7. August 12, 2014. In Dearborn, Michigan, Ahmed Hassan stood outside the reception hall, still in his wedding suit, as friends and family gathered for the traditional send-off. The ceremony had ended just 11 minutes earlier. Among the 120 guests, excitement filled the air, a celebration marked by music, laughter, and, as in many Middle Eastern weddings, a burst of celebratory gunfire meant to honor the groom. One guest raised a 9mm pistol and fired a single round skyward, a common gesture meant to mark the occasion. The bullet arced upward and, unseen, began its deadly descent. Traveling at nearly 300 feet per second, it struck Ahmed on the left parietal bone. He collapsed instantly, surrounded by stunned guests and a bride who had just become a widow. Emergency responders pronounced him dead at the scene. The shooter was never identified. Police ballistics report 14 Mi-965 confirmed the cause as a falling bullet from celebratory fire. In the aftermath, Dearborn enacted a citywide ban on gunfire at events, and wedding planners across the region began warning couples about the risks of traditional send-offs. For Ahmed Hassan, a ritual of joy became the final act of his wedding day. On June 9, 2019 at 6:47 in the evening, the reception hall in Dallas pulsed with anticipation. Just 5 minutes remained before the couple's grand entrance. Behind the scenes, 28-year-old Corey Patel, a freelance lighting technician, worked quickly to fix a faulty uplight along the main aisle. The venue's event manager had requested a last-minute adjustment to ensure the couple's first steps as newlyweds would be perfectly illuminated for the waiting crowd of 240 guests. Corey reached for a Parcan fixture mounted on an aluminum truss. As he adjusted the unit, a 277-volt arc shot through an ungrounded housing. The electrical surge coursed through his body, throwing him nearly 6 feet onto the polished concrete floor. Witnesses described a sharp crack, the smell of burning insulation, and a sudden unnatural silence that swept through the hall. Corey's heart went into ventricular fibrillation. An on-site EMT responded within 2 minutes, but attempts at resuscitation failed. He was pronounced dead at 6:56 p.m., less than 10 minutes after the shock. The celebration stopped before it began. OSHA investigators later cited the venue for multiple violations, including improper grounding of temporary event wiring. The resulting $150,000 fine forced a complete overhaul of their electrical safety protocols. The National Electrical Code was updated to require ground fault protection on all temporary event circuits, a change that rippled through the wedding industry. Corey Patel's death exposed the hidden dangers faced by the professionals who make wedding dreams possible and left a legacy of stricter safety standards for every celebration that followed. Kelsey Monroe was the kind of friend who made every moment a little more memorable. At 27, she stood beside her childhood best friend as maid of honor, her lavender gown trailing across the manicured lawns of Shelburne House in Shelburne, Vermont. The wedding had drawn 180 guests, all eager to capture the perfect shot for social media. As dusk settled on July 22, 2018, the bridesmaids gathered for a photo dare to climb into the estate decorative fountain, a tradition that had become popular online. Kelsey hesitated, but laughter and the promise of viral photos won out. The water, only 2 feet deep, seemed harmless. At 9:03 p.m., Kelsey stepped onto the slick marble edge. Her shoes slipped. She fell backward and plunged into the fountain. The weight of her gown, 18 pounds when soaked, wrapped around her legs and pinned her below the surface. Friends rushed to help, but with no life ring nearby and the heavy tangled fabric, it took 92 seconds to pull her free. By then, she was unresponsive. Guests made emergency calls and paramedics arrived within minutes, but resuscitation failed. Toxicology later found a blood alcohol content of 0.09, just above the legal driving limit. A venue liability deposition revealed that no safety barriers or rescue equipment had been installed, despite previous near misses. Kelsey Monroe's death was ruled an accidental drowning. The aftermath reached far beyond her circle. Vermont enacted new regulations requiring water feature barriers at all event venues, a change born directly from this wedding day. Tragedy. She is remembered by family and friends, and the case became a cautionary example for couples and vendors about how a playful tradition can become permanently deadly. By 9:41 p.m. on February 27, 2020, the reception at the Grand Lotus Banquet Hall in Queens had reached its peak. 250 guests crowded onto a temporary dance platform, drawn together by the thumping beat of the cha-cha slide. The couple had chosen the portable stage for its promise of extra space and a better view for photos, trusting the rental company's assurances that it was safe for large groups. The manufacturer's paperwork listed a maximum load of 50 pounds per square foot, but the combined weight of dancers, many moving in sync, jumping and stomping, pushed the pressure past 120 pounds per square foot. Oliver Chen, 34, had flown in from Seattle to celebrate with college friends. As the DJ called out, "Everybody clap your hands," the platform began to creak beneath the shifting crowd. Seconds later, the structure gave way without warning. The floor dropped nearly 5 feet, sending dozens of people tumbling into the basement below. Splintered plywood, twisted metal supports, and the crush of bodies created instant chaos. Oliver suffered a fatal cervical fracture in the collapse, his injuries pronounced irreversible at the scene. 17 others were rushed to area hospitals with broken bones, head trauma, and deep lacerations. Paramedics triaged guests in the shattered hall, while emergency crews struggled to extract those pinned under debris. The remaining guests, stunned and bloodied, gathered outside as the celebration ended in sirens and disbelief. The New York City Department of Buildings launched an immediate investigation. Incident 2020 DF447 confirmed that the platform had not been certified for events exceeding 200 square feet. Within weeks, the city banned uncertified portable dance floors at all public gatherings. Rental companies faced new inspection requirements, and wedding planners across the boroughs updated their safety checklists. Oliver Chen's death, and the injuries of so many others, forced the industry to confront the risks of cutting corners for a perfect party. Bailey Ackerman and Will Byler spent months planning a send-off that would outshine every wedding photo in their college town. Both were 24, recent graduates of Sam Houston State, and they wanted their November 3, 2018 celebration to end with a memory that would last a lifetime. They chose an aerial exit, part spectacle and part statement, a decision meant to be the perfect finale. As the reception tent in Uvalde, Texas emptied and the last toasts faded, a Bell 206B helicopter waited on a nearby field, its rotors slicing the cool night air. At 11:52 p.m., the helicopter lifted off with the newlyweds and their pilot, Jerry Garman, a family friend with over 24,000 flight hours. Guests waved and filmed from the tent, 200 yards away. 7 minutes later, at 11:59 p.m., the aircraft plunged nose down at a 63-degree angle into rugged brushland, just out of sight but close enough for the music to be interrupted by the thunder of impact. The force of the crash killed Bailey instantly. Will, pinned by the collapsed fuselage, remained conscious for nearly 4 minutes as guests and first responders rushed across the field. He succumbed to his injuries before extraction could begin. The pilot was killed on impact. Debris from the wreck injured 6 guests who arrived at the crash site ahead of emergency personnel. The scene was suddenly tragic. The National Transportation Safety Board investigation, docket CEN 19FA021, found no evidence of mechanical failure. Instead, the report cited disorientation and insufficient altitude in night conditions. The helicopter was not cleared for low-altitude flights after dark, and the charter permit had expired. The Federal Aviation Administration responded by issuing a bulletin on the dangers of low-altitude event flights, warning against spectacle transport traditions that bypass basic safety. Memorial scholarships now bear Bailey and Will's names at their alma mater, a gesture meant to honor a love story cut short by a choice meant to elevate a celebration. Their deaths led to increased scrutiny of dramatic exit practices and new guidance aimed at event planners and operators. For every couple dreaming of a dramatic exit, their story stands as a permanent caution. The pursuit of the perfect send-off can end a wedding day in tragedy. Sarah Whitfield and Nathan Carter spent nearly a year searching for the perfect location. They settled on Windmere Cliffs, a boutique venue perched above the red rocks of Sedona, Arizona. The site's main draw, a glass platform cantilevered 8 feet beyond the cliff edge, promised sunset photos with nothing but sky and sandstone in the background. Marketing materials boasted the platform's strength, but the fine print listed a 6-person maximum. On May 14, 2017, Sarah, age 29, and Nathan, 31, gathered with 60 guests for their evening ceremony. The couple's vision was clear: exchange vows as the sun dipped behind Cathedral Rock, standing with their closest friends above the valley. At 7:08 p.m., the wedding party assembled on the platform for a group photo. 18 people crowded onto the glass, triple the posted limit. An engineering inspection 2 weeks earlier had flagged minor stress cracks, but venue management dismissed the warning, citing the structure's tempered design. No one raised concerns as the photographer called for everyone to squeeze closer. At 7:14 p.m., a faint popping sound echoed beneath the group. The platform's main support beam sheared, sending the entire wedding party plunging 45 feet onto the sandstone below. Sarah, in her full-length gown and heels, fell first. She suffered fatal blunt force trauma and died instantly. 3 guests were critically injured, 2 with spinal fractures and 1 with a collapsed lung. Nathan survived with minor cuts and a fractured wrist. Paramedics arrived within 11 minutes, but for Sarah, there was nothing to be done. The aftermath was swift and public. The Arizona Board of Technical Registration released Report AZ-17-CLF, citing the venue for gross negligence. The investigation confirmed that the platform had never undergone independent structural certification before the event. Windermere Cliffs declared bankruptcy within 6 months. In response, Arizona lawmakers enacted Statute Section 41860, mandating pre-event engineering sign-off for any elevated event structure statewide. Sarah Whitfield's death became a case study in the dangers of aesthetics over safety. Her name appears in engineering seminars and wedding industry briefings, a cautionary tale for couples and venues alike. Where once the platform promised the ultimate wedding photo, it now stands as a warning. Beauty unchecked by caution can be fatal. September 26, 2023. In the heart of Hamdaniya, Iraq, the Al Haytham Wedding Hall glowed with LED-lit grandeur as over 400 guests gathered for the union of Hanan Araha, age 27, and Revan Ghanem, age 18. The couple had chosen this venue for its shimmering ceiling and modern lighting, features meant to transform their first dance into a spectacle. As the clock neared 10:45 p.m., the newlyweds took to the center of the marble floor, surrounded by friends, family, and the promise of a night to remember. A 1,000-watt LED panel installed by a contracted vendor burned overhead. The hall's ceiling was draped in translucent polyethylene sheets chosen for their ability to reflect colored lights in photos. Moments into the dance, the LED fixture overheated. Within seconds, the casing ignited the plastic sheeting. Forensic fire modeling later showed that the flashover, when the entire ceiling surface erupted, took just 18 seconds. Flames raced across the roof, raining molten debris onto the guests below. Panic swept the hall. Hundreds surged toward the only available exit, a 4-foot-wide staircase at the far end of the room. The crush at that bottleneck trapped dozens, while others turned back, seeking windows or side doors that would not open. As burning fragments fell, a segment of the roof collapsed, killing and injuring those caught beneath. Emergency responders arrived within minutes, but the intensity of the fire and the density of the crowd made rescue efforts nearly impossible. The official casualty count reached 93 confirmed dead, with reports ranging from 64 to as high as 107. More than 150 others suffered burns, fractures, and smoke inhalation. Among the dead was the groom, Hanan Araha. The bride, Revan Ghanem, survived but sustained third-degree burns to her arms, face, and torso. The severity of the fire left many victims unrecognizable. Only 52 bodies could be identified by family members. The rest required DNA analysis, a process that stretched on for weeks, compounding the grief for families awaiting news. The Iraqi Civil Defense Report number 23QWF cited a convergence of fatal errors: flammable decor, overloaded lighting equipment, and a single inadequate egress route. The United Nations Humanitarian Office classified the event as the deadliest wedding disaster in modern history. National mourning was declared. In the days that followed, forensic teams combed through the charred remains of the hall, mapping the spread of the fire and the collapse of the roof. Survivors described the stampede, how formal gowns and suits meant for celebration became obstacles in the scramble to escape. The investigation led to immediate consequences. The Ministry of Interior ordered the closure of all event venues failing fire safety inspections. Polyethylene ceiling drapes were banned in public gathering spaces, and new regulations mandated multiple exits for any hall hosting more than 50 people. Wedding planners across the region rewrote their safety protocols, and vendors faced new licensing requirements for all electrical equipment used at events. These closures and regulations sought to prevent a repeat of that night. The Karakosh wedding fire forced a reckoning with the hidden dangers that can lurk behind the pursuit of spectacle. The shimmering ceiling, the promise of the perfect first dance, the trust in professional expertise all became factors in a tragedy that claimed nearly 100 lives. In the aftermath, memorials filled the streets of Hamdaniya. The names of the victims, including Hanan Auraha, were read aloud in churches and public squares. For every couple planning a celebration, the legacy of that night endures. Beauty and joy can never come at the expense of safety. The deadliest wedding day disaster on record stands as a permanent warning. Choices made for a single night can echo for generations. Across all 7 tragedies, one pattern stands clear. The very choices meant to create joy, venues, traditions, and celebrations can turn deadly in an instant. Weddings promise new beginnings, but human decisions and overlooked risks still shape their fates today. Even the happiest days demand vigilance. Behind every celebration, safety is never just a backdrop. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts on the most shocking entry below.